Welcome to 5 Points Blues presentation of Back to the Basics. Everything you wanted to know about Cowboys football, but were too afraid to ask. Here are your hosts, Nikki Harrison and Christy Scales.
Welcome, everybody, and we have a very special guest this week filling in for Nikki Harrison, who is on spring break with her husband and her kids. Shout out to Nikki. We have big shoes to fill, so we brought in a heavy hitter, Charean Williams, of Pro Football Talk and, of course, Cowboys Nation. Most of you know Charean from covering the Cowboys since 1999 with the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, but now she's with Pro Football Talk, a writer for them. And reason why we have Charean is there's so much going on this week in free agency, a lot to talk about around the NFL, but also as we continue celebrating Women in History Month for the month of March, Charean is the first female selector for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the first female president of the Pro Football Writers Association of America. So thanks for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, the Wednesday is the actual day where free agents can sign with NFL teams, but yesterday and today, the craziness with deals being negotiated. How do you characterize free agency in the NFL?
I think you call it the silly season, kind of like they do in NASCAR. It just gets crazy, and it is silly. All the rumors, we heard Andrew Norwell was down to the Giants and 49ers and Colts, and he commits to the Jaguars, and there's all those kinds of things where you hear one thing and the opposite ends up happening.
Yeah, and the thing about Norwell, and there are a lot of people like, Andrew Norwell, well, he is the top free agent guard on the market, and he leaves Carolina for Jacksonville. Well, whoop-de-doo, what do we care? We care a lot, Cowboys Nation, because his signing affects the price tag for Zach Martin. And the Cowboys have been very clear that this offseason the priorities were making sure we retain DeMarcus Lawrence at defensive end.
Which is going to happen.
Yes, with the franchise tag, and he's already signed that, and hopefully a long-term deal will get done before the mid-July deadline. But Zach Martin is currently on the books for $9.341 million for 2018, but the Cowboys want to get the long-term extension. So Andrew Norwell signing with Jacksonville for 5 years, $66.5 million. That's an average of $13.3 million annually. So if Norwell gets that, what do you think Martin can get?
Which makes him the highest paid guard on an average yearly basis. So, you've got to pay Zach Martin more than that. And I'm sure Zach Martin and his representatives were waiting for that deal to go down to figure out exactly what Zach Martin's value was. And now they know. Now the Cowboys know we're going to have to pay more than that to get Zach Martin signed. So I think the price has been set, and now they can move on and get that done.
They can get that done, but you look back and say, man, if they only could have gotten him signed before last season, right? They probably could have got him for $12.5 million
absolutely.
a year.
It would have been less than what they're going to pay now. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and then the other thing that I think it's really important for people to look at, and one thing that we do on this podcast is try and go, beyond headlines and just kind of explain things. Everything you wanted to know about football but were afraid to ask. What happens with these headlines and what the agents and players, they throw out these gaudy numbers, right? Yeah. But really the thing to look at is guaranteed money. Absolutely. And so Andrew Norwell's deal with Jacksonville is $30 million guaranteed. And so that's the thing about the NFL. There are very few guarantees. Salaries usually are not guaranteed if you were to get injured and things like that. But Zach Martin, 30, 35 million, 40
It's got to
million?
be. Again, I think it's got to top what Norwell got. And I think you've also got to give him a big signing bonus. And Jerry's always done that with these players, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. I absolutely think they'll take care of Zach Martin. It's just got to be something that he's happy with and his representatives are happy with. And I think they're probably headed that way. They have a clearer vision now of what the contract needs to look like based on Kevin Zeitler, the Cleveland guard who signed last year, who became the highest paid, and now Andrew Norwell has topped that. So you have those two contracts to look at and play with, and it's going to be along the same lines as those two guys.
Yeah, and Zeitler's average was $12 million, and his practical guarantees on the $52.5 million contract were $31.5 million. So, yeah, Martin will get
32, 35, somewhere probably in that range, with at least half of that and probably a signing bonus, maybe more. And then the Cowboys can spread out that.
Yes.
If they give him the money up front, they could spread that out over the life of the contract. And Zach's so young that there's no fear that, in 5 years from now, you can always have injuries in football, but the fact is he's young. So you figure you give him a 4 or 5 year deal. He's got those good 4 or 5 years in him, probably more than that.
Yeah,
unforeseen injury.
I'm glad you mentioned about how you kind of spread out with the signing bonuses and things like that, because again, that's another thing for people to understand is basically you prorate, the deal. So if someone were to get $50 million guaranteed, then or a signing bonus for $50 million and it's a 5-year deal, then you would spread that $10 million out for each year. So 50 divided by 5, $10 million a year. So just kind of an explanation. That's why when you have the long-term deals and you have the big bonus money, the player gets that whole $50 million at one time, but against the salary cap, you divide it by the number of years. Let's talk about Anthony Hitchens, who is one of my favorite guys, was one of my favorite guys for the Dallas Cowboys, our starting middle linebacker, who reportedly is signing with the Chiefs for $9 million a year. Is that a little higher than you anticipated?
I didn't see him getting $9 million a year. I thought he would have a healthy market, and I was looking more at the $6 to $7 million range, probably, for a guy who has no Pro Bowls. His versatility sold, I'm sure, teams on him because he can play all 3 linebacker positions. But I did not see him getting $9 million a year. That's a little high, and I understand the Cowboys not paying that now. They probably would have gotten him for less if they hadn't let him get to the open market. But you can't blame him for not paying him $9 million. I don't know that he's worth $9 million a year. That's tough. That's tough against your cap to pay him that.
Yeah, and just the reports of him going to the Chiefs, I was a little surprised just because with Matt Eberflus, the former Cowboys linebacker coach, leaving in the earlier this offseason to go to Indianapolis. I think a lot of people assumed it was that he would take Anthony Hitchens along with him. So the Chiefs, the other thing is the Chiefs play a 3-4 defense, which is something that we explained, I think, on our very first 5 Points Blue podcast. For those of you that remember that one back in November, the 3-4 defense that Kansas City plays would have 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, whereas the Cowboys play a 4-3, 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers. And Anthony, as Charean mentioned, versatile. He's played all 3 linebacker positions, but I'm assuming that he would probably play an inside.
Yes, no doubt.
Derek Johnson.
Absolutely, yeah. Probably take Derek Johnson's place. I think that's probably a good call on what he's going to do in Kansas City, but I'm with you. I think Indianapolis, to me, seemed like a natural fit if he was going to leave Dallas. I know the Cowboys love him, wanted to keep him. But you can only keep so many guys. I mean, they've made that commitment to DeMarcus Lawrence. They've made that commitment to Zach Martin. You can't keep them all. But you got to replace them, too. So now they got to figure out, what to do because they don't want Jalen Smith playing that many snaps either.
Right.
He played too many last year.
Yeah, especially early. And the reason why he played so many early in the season is because Hitchens missed the first 4 games with a knee injury. And then Sean Lee obviously missed a little bit of time last year, too. But let's talk about the market for wide receivers, because with what you do with Pro Football Talk, and you're not just covering Cowboys, you see everything across the league. But Sammy Watkins, $16 million a year. Of course, Dez is slated to count $16.5 million base salary for the Cowboys. Yeah, Allen Robinson, 14.
Yeah, it's the receiver market's off the charts.
Albert Wilson.
Yeah, it's just
who is Albert Wilson? Well, he was with the Chiefs.
Yeah, right.
But $8 million
good year.
Yeah, one good year, 42 catches and 500 and something or 600 and something yards, and he gets $8 million a year.
Yeah.
So we didn't know what a great value Dez is. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, right. Exactly. They're going to have a decision to make on Dez here coming up. fairly quickly and have to decide, what to do with him, if he's going to take a pay cut or what to move on. The problem is you can't draft a rookie receiver and expect him to come in and be your number one receiver. We saw last year, we had 3 top 10 receivers. Combined, they do nothing. The 3 of them do nothing. Those 3 drafted in the top 10. They may eventually, but that first year, it's just not going to happen. It just doesn't translate. Randy Moss is the one guy you think of that came in and really made an impact as a rookie. Dez was okay as a rookie. But that guy, to expect him to come in and be the number one guy, it's just really hard that first season. So to replace a Dez, you really need a veteran guy to come in to replace him, and you're still talking a big chunk of money to go out and get a receiver as a replacement if you let him go. So, a lot to consider there, because who's going to be your number one receiver if you do indeed cut him?
Yeah, and if you go for a burner, a fast guy who's going to take the top off the defense, be able to streak down the field and stuff, well, that's very different than what you have in Dez, who's a great, red zone target, big guy, throw the ball up, back shoulder kind of thing. So it's really, to me, 2 different kinds of receivers.
It is.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to decide what best fits Dak Prescott, because, even the Cowboys have said, Dez may not fit exactly what Dak does. So if Dez does stay, then they got to figure out how to make those 2 mesh a little bit better than what they have. If they move on from Dez, then it's figuring out, okay, what kind of receiver really meshes with Dak, and that's the guy we need to go get. But again, these receivers are going off the board quickly already.
Yeah.
And, free agency's coming up tomorrow, but they're going. They're going pretty fast.
And we mentioned Sammy Watkins earlier, who had been with the Bills and then got traded to the Rams, and he gets the $16 million deal. But Sanjay Lal, who is the new Cowboys wide receivers coach, had been in Buffalo and knew Watkins, so there was a little bit of a tie there. But I think it'll be really interesting. There are going to be a lot of interesting things to watch this offseason, and as we get into OTAs and mini camps and certainly training camp and see the blend of the new coaches on the coaching staff, because this has been a tremendous, it's not at the core, other than Rich Bisaccia, our special teams coordinator who left for Oakland. Cowboys promoted within, so Keith O'Quinn, KO, gets promoted to special teams coordinator. But gosh, so many changes on the staff. How do you see that shaking out? I mean, because there's not as much familiarity with the position coaches and the returning position players.
No, absolutely. There have been some big changes, and I talked to Jason about that a while. We were on the same flight together, and we were standing at baggage claim, and he likes what he's getting with these new coaches and some new input from them and some new ideas, and hopefully that rubs off, and thinks at the same time that keeping the 2 coordinators, things stay a little more the same. But it is going to be interesting because it is change, and it is different, and it is the position coaches getting to know their players. They don't know their players. They're watching them on film right now, trying to figure them out, but you still don't know them until you get in that room with them, on the sideline with them, in game type situations with them. You don't know your players. So it's going to take some time for these guys to develop that. And that's what why the offseason is so big for the Cowboys. They didn't make a head coaching change. They didn't make coordinator changes, but they do have all these position coaches changing. So it's still a big offseason from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And time is something that you really don't have in the NFL. And the other thing is, there's not that much off-season work anymore.
Yeah.
And the time that the coaches have with the players, there's you can't have contact, right? You can't even tackle until and that's starting on the 3rd practice of training camp. So it's not a physical kind of thing. So I just think it's harder these days for the coaches to get a read on, especially the physicality of their players and the like. But hey, I want to make sure that we have plenty of time to cover something, because as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, you're the first female selector for the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So how many years now have you been
I just finished my 12th.
Your 12th year.
This will be the 13th.
So what we want you to do is take us behind the scenes on the selection process. And before we go through the mechanics of it, how did it go with we know that Everson Walls was a final, didn't make it out of the top 10, I think. But what was it like in the room when our Cowboy nominee this year, Everson Walls, when the 48 selectors are talking about him?
Well, I think the big question was, why has it taken so long? Why did he fall through the cracks for this long? Because it was his first time in the room to be discussed, and it was his last time in the room to be discussed. He now goes on that seniors committee where there's a huge backlog, so it may be a little bit of time. But I think it was huge for him from that standpoint, just from people getting to hear his case and how good he was. And for whatever reason, he did fall through the cracks. But the fact that he led the league in interceptions the 3 times, the amount of interceptions that he has and where it ranks in NFL history, there aren't many guys in the NFL who have more interceptions than what he had. And the coaches he played for, I mean, it's unbelievable, the 3 coaches that he played for, Hall of Fame coaches or Hall of Fame type coaches in the league. So,
at Landry, Parcells,
yeah.
Belichick was his position, coordinator.
So I mean, you're talking, Hall of Fame guys there, or future Hall of Fame guys there that coached him, and I think that says a lot about Everson's. But having his case heard, I think, sets him up now to go in as a seniors candidate at some point. Can't promise it'll be this year or next year, but hopefully in the next 5-6 years. He's one of those guys we're talking about as a guy that's another Cowboy going to the Hall of Fame.
Does the fact that Everson, he's not a member of the Cowboys Ring of Honor, does that come up in the meetings, something like that?
Sometimes it does. With him, it didn't come up. But I any of that obviously helps his case, because you can present it as, hey, he's one of the greatest Cowboys of all time. Look, he's in the Ring of Honor. And that's always big. I think Gil Brandt is another one that would probably help, for as good as Gil Brandt's career was, and from the personnel side under Landry and Schramm, and how big he was in that threesome. Having him in that Ring of Honor, I think, is just another thing you can say, look, he was one of the Cowboys consider him one of the greatest of all time in their organization. He's in their Ring of Honor. So I do think it helps. I don't know that it hurts all that much, but it does help, because it's another thing you can point to.
Yeah. So Gil Brandt, for those who are younger Cowboys fans, Gil Brandt, now we think of him with NFL.com and the scouting and stuff, but he's one of the original Cowboys executives, along with Tom Landry and Tex Schramm, and just changed scouting, bringing in computers, and just really changed the landscape, not just for the Cowboys, the innovations they brought to NFL scouting, but really things that have been standard in the league for a long time, or something that he introduced with the Cowboys. But someone like Gil Brandt or Jerry Jones last year went in as contributors. So could you tell us about the different you have contributors, you have senior candidates, and then you have the players. You have to be retired for 5 years, right, to be considered?
That's correct.
Okay, so what's the process for each of those 3?
So a contributor, I'm on the contributor committee, as is Rick Goslin of the Dallas Morning News, and it's a separate committee. 5 people meet every August and elect. Sometimes it's 2 candidates, sometimes it's 1 candidate. That's where Jerry was. He was a contributor's candidate. It's anybody except coaches and players. So the Sables from NFL Films, scouts, general managers.
Tex Schramm is in as
Tex Schramm. Well, he would have been.
He would have been.
If we had had the category back then. Jerry Jones is obviously a contributor. Paul Tagliabue.
The former commissioner.
Yeah, contributor. So all those types of people, referees are in that pool. Anybody really like that. And then seniors are just guys who've been retired for a long time, like Everson Walls, who now goes in that.
Is it 20 years?
I think it's 20 years eligible, so it would be 25 years after you've played.
Okay. So
and
Everson
then you go to
Walls
seniors.
had been eligible for 20 years.
Yes.
This past year, so that's why you say it was his last chance in that category, and now he goes to the seniors.
So he goes
category.
from modern era to the seniors candidate.
Okay.
And
Okay.
So that's players and coaches remain in the modern era. They never go to the seniors. So the modern era ballot is just coaches and players, and the coaches will stay in that forever until they go in or they just stay on that side. I would like to see coaches added to the contributor category.
Yeah.
Because I think eventually you run out of really good contributor candidates. So you either get rid of that category, or you put the coaches in that category.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's the Don Coryells and, we can name a lot of Jimmy Johnson, and he probably deserves to go in, or at least a little more consideration than what he's gotten, and Tom Flores. And there's a lot of coaches that we could consider if we put them in that contributors category. They'd probably end up getting in.
Let's take us to August then, if you're one of the 5 people on the committee for the contributors category, and so Jerry gets approved, or what's the correct term? So last August, are you the one that is making the argument for Jerry, or his?
I was not on the committee the year that Jerry was elected. I was on this past August when we did Bobby Beathard.
Okay.
And I was on 2 before that. So it's 5 different people every year. It rotates. Let's put it that way. So you could conceivably be on 2 years in a row, but you have 2 consultants who come in. John Madden was a consultant. Dan Rooney's been a consultant when I've been in there.
He's the owner
Steelers
of this
owner.
Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, he's been a consultant. Bruce Allen, I started to say George Allen. George Allen's son, Bruce, who's with Washington,
General
was a
manager.
Consultant, yeah. So had some owners who've come in and consulted. Bill Polian, Ron Wolf have consulted. So you have those consultants, and really you just go down the list of candidates and you get input from those 2 consultants on what they think, and they rate the candidates, and you ask questions of them and you discuss among yourselves, and then they leave the room. The consultants leave the room, and you the 5 members of the committee discuss what was heard and what we think, and we kind of go back and forth, and then you eliminate. I think we go to 3, and then we go to 2. I think we go to 5 first. Whatever the ballots are, you reduce that ballot down. And eventually you either get to 2 candidates, or 1 candidate alternates every other year. So this year it'll be back to 2 in August when they meet again, or I meet again, or whoever it is.
Yeah. So you have the contributor, so up to 2 candidates for the contributors, or 1,
Right.
depending. And then you have your modern era, and then 2 senior candidates.
2 or 1. They alternate. So if it's
one
2
or the other.
contributors, it's 1 seniors. If it's 2 seniors, it's 1 contributor.
And then you get to the day before the Super Bowl, when all 48 selectors are in the room for 8, 9, 10 hours?
Yeah, it was about 8 hours this year. It was a little shorter this year. Probably one of the shorter ones I've been in. At least 8.
Why do you think it was shorter? You just a little easier on the cut line?
It's a good question why it was shorter. There were not any really extended, long debates. Tagliabue's a long debate every time he comes in the room. T.O. normally is a long debate. He wasn't as long as normal, and he got in.
Because everyone had heard the arguments before.
And
on
maybe
TO?
that was it. Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. But yeah, maybe everyone had heard the arguments for T.O. and we'd been past that, and okay, it's time to put him in type.
So let's talk about the debates. And it goes to the fact that of the 48, you have a representative from each market, right?
Correct.
So Rick Goslin, and you formerly of Fort Worth Star-Telegram, you're an at-large.
I'm an at-large,
But Rick represents any cowboy that would be nominated, Rick Goslin would argue for. If it were someone who were San Francisco 49ers, then the person representing the 49ers market, the pro football writer, would represent that. So you stand up and you just read you've done the presentations before.
Yeah.
Who have
I
you
did
presented
Larry
before?
Allen. I presented
Okay.
Larry Allen.
Okay. And you write like a book report or something and read it?
You do, and you have a certain amount of time that they tell you that you could present, and there's a running clock, and you present, you sit down, and then you discuss the presentation, or people have stuff to add, whether it's for or against the candidate. A lot of times it's people wanting to add something to the presentation. So for instance, if Goose presents Jerry, I'll know beforehand really what he's saying, and I'll say, okay, what do I need to talk about? And so there'll be things that I might want to add that he didn't get to because of the time constraint. You could get up there and talk for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and so it's really restricted on how much Goose can say. So I'll add on to what he says.
I see.
And then we'll kind of go around the room and people discuss.
So you're tag teaming to get
Absolutely.
to get your candidate, someone you feel is deserving or from your market.
Absolutely.
In.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the question. Who do you think is the next Cowboy that will be up for discussion and one of the finalists?
It could be a seniors candidate, but we just don't know what the seniors committee is going to do. They don't know what they're going to do. So it's hard to predict who that seniors candidate might be, whether it's a Chuck Halley or a Leroy Jordan or a Cliff Harris. My money would be on Cliff Harris, to be honest, to be the next seniors candidate. But obviously we had the momentum now for Everson Walls, so he could be a candidate. But there's a lot of candidates. Drew Pearson, a lot of candidates there that could be up for it. But since we don't know who the seniors committee might pick out of that group, if they do pick a Cowboy, I think you got to say DeMarcus Ware.
Yeah, and so we have to wait another 4 years after that, because you have to be retired
for 5 seasons.
5 seasons.
And he's sat out, one season now. So he's got 4 more seasons to wait, and he will be a first ballot Hall of Famer. But I think he's
throwing the prediction down.
Yeah, I think he's probably the next one. I don't see
unless Gil
else.
Brandt gets in.
Unless Gil would get in
as a finalist, as a contributor.
Gil absolutely has a shot this year to go in as a contributor. In the next 2 years, has a shot to go in. Again, those are just kind of hard to predict because you don't know who those committees, what the makeup of the committee is really important, and then who they're going to pick. But yeah, Gil's got a shot too, and I didn't mean to leave Gil out because I do think he's got a really good shot in the next couple of years to go.
I got time for one more question. We'll end it with this question, and I'm asking you: 13 going on 13 seasons as a Hall of Fame selector. There are people in Cowboys Nation who believe there is a Cowboy bias. Because, how can Drew Pearson, Cliff Harris, he's not in? What do you say to those folks who think that, we're not represented enough?
You could have argued that a few years ago, but then you get Rayfield Wright and Bob Hayes and Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin and Deion Sanders and now T.O. and, whether you want to include them or not, they were Cowboys. But you've just had this run. So I don't know that you could say that anymore. What I think you could say is some of those guys in the 1970s, 1980s were passed over. All those guys we just mentioned were passed over. If they had won one more Super Bowl, beaten Pittsburgh in one of those Super Bowls, a lot of those guys would be in. It didn't happen, so now they've had to wait. I do think some of those guys eventually go in. I just hope they go in when they understand that they're in the Hall of Fame. Pat Bowlen, for instance, is going to go in the next couple of years, and unfortunately has Alzheimer's, and it's not going. It'll be big for his family, but I wish he had been alive, and he's going to be alive. But I wish he knew that he was going to get to go in. So it's so big for these guys to know before they die that they're Hall of Famers. I just think it's important. Bob Hayes was one who obviously never knew that he was in the Hall of Fame. So, you don't want to wait too long on some of these guys, but unfortunately there's this huge backlog, and every team thinks they're
there are so many more teams that the fans really have a gripe, in my opinion.
Denver's one that's huge. Yeah. They've only got a handful of players in there in the Hall of Fame for the Super Bowls they've won.
Yeah, and hey, first things first, let's get some of these guys in the Ring of Honor. DeMarcus Ware spilled the beans, went meeting with the media back in February regarding his work as ambassador for the NFL draft coming up, that he's talked to Jerry about Ring of Honor, the no date or anything like that. But, Everson Walls, there are so many guys. So, we'll go upstairs and talk with Jerry. His office is just 2 floors above us, so we'll take care of that. But
coming at you, Jerry.
Yeah, Charean, thank you so much. I know it's a busy week for you with Pro Football Talk. Hey, Nikki Harrison, we look forward to having you back. Enjoy the rest of your spring break, and hope everybody has a great week there in Cowboys Nation. Thanks for joining us for everything you wanted to know about football, but were too afraid to ask, right here on 5 Points Blue.
This has been a production of 5 Points Blue, DallasCowboys.com, and the Dallas Cowboys Football Club.